Well, welcome to you. My name is Jeff Lerner, and I am a consultant with the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities, and it is my pleasure to introduce and moderate this webinar today. And there we go. I want to thank AWWA for helping us host this webinar. We thought that this topic of watershed protection and military installations may be novel and of interest to water utilities. We and AWWA would like to thank the 2020 webinar sponsors, Woodard and Curran, Logistec Environment, M.E. Simpson, and Napoli Shkolnik. Here are some tips to enhance your webinar experience. We recommend that you close your email, instant messengers, and other programs not currently in use, as they may interfere with a smooth reception of the webinar, causing slide buffering and poor sound quality. Technical assistance can be found at the GoToWebinar technical support page, which you see at the link listed in your handouts or on the slide shown here. As soon as you close the GoToWebinar screen and leave the webinar, a window is going to open with a survey questionnaire. And we ask that you all take just a few minutes to answer the survey questions. Your feedback is important to us and will help AWWA and those of us putting together these webinars to improve webinar programming in the future. So thank you for that. Before we hear from our speakers, I need to also inform you that the mention of any specific products or services in this webinar does not represent AWWA endorsement. AWWA does not endorse or approve products or services. So we're going to be talking about military installations. So if you were to see a tank or a helicopter or a jet and you're wondering, how do I get one of those? I'm sorry, but neither we nor AWWA can help you there. And so it is with great pleasure that I'm pleased to introduce our panel of speakers for today's program. Kristen Thomasgaard directs the Department of Defense REPI program across the country. Shannon Wetstein is the district manager with the Morrison Soil and Water Conservation District in Minnesota. Dr. Susan Carr is the O2O program manager with the North Florida Land Trust, and she'll explain what O2O means in her talk. And John Barrett is the land program director with the Arizona Land and Water Trust. And on this next slide, I also wanted to take a couple of minutes to let you know that all the projects you will hear about today are also supported by the Healthy Watersheds Consortium grant program. The consortium is a partnership which was started in 2015 between the EPA, the NRCS, and the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities, focused on protecting watershed lands before they become degraded. And on this next slide, the map that you're seeing will show the different watersheds where our 56 grantees are active around the country. And they've been making great progress. And in the last 4 years, they've protected about 500,000 acres of land and over 1,000 miles of streams. And over the next couple of years, we expect that those numbers are going to increase significantly. They could even double in the next year or so. On the next slide here, I wanted to remind you about today's learning objectives. Watersheds can be massive areas, and as you know, source water protection areas can also cover many acres. The protection of all those lands is a large-scale effort that may take many years, a lot of interactions with landowners and communities, as well as a good dose of creative funding. And so we hope to illustrate some of this through today's presentations. It can help to have partners like the Department of Defense, other agencies, as well as conservation-oriented groups implementing protection like soil and water conservation districts, land trusts, and other watershed organizations. And so on this next slide, here is our agenda for today's webinar. We'll start off with Kristen for some introductory comments on DoD programs. She also has a short, inspiring video to help illustrate some of what the speakers will be talking about. Then Shannon will talk about their work with Camp Ripley in Minnesota. Then Susan will discuss their work with Camp Blanding in Florida. And last but not least, we'll have John talk about their work involving Fort Huachuca in Arizona. So 3 different parts of the country, and each with different watershed protection needs and challenges. And I'm happy to say that progress is being made on watershed protection in each of these areas. On this next slide, I want to mention that we should have time at the end for some questions. So feel free to submit your questions anytime throughout the broadcast by using the question pane on the right of your screen. And if your question is for a specific panelist, if you could please include the name of that panelist in your question, it would really help us out. So if you have a specific DoD program question, please say this is for Kristen. Or if it's for Arizona, please say for John. Tell us a little bit more about this particular aspect of your Arizona work. This webinar is being recorded, so speakers, please watch your language. Please don't give away any military secrets. And with that, it is my pleasure to hand you off to Kristen Thomasgaard with the Department of Defense. Kristen?
Hi, thank you, Jeff, and good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to say a quick thank you to the American Waterworks Association for the opportunity to participate in today's webinar on watershed protection and military installations. As Jeff said, my name is Kristen Thomasgaard. I am the Program Director for the Department of Defense Readiness and Environmental Protection Integration Program, or REPI. I also lead the Federal Coordinating Committee for the Sentinel Landscapes Partnership, and I'll talk about both of those programs. To set the stage for today's discussion, I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to explain why conservation partnerships are so critical to the Department of Defense mission accomplishment. DoD's enduring mission is to provide combat credible military forces needed to deter war and protect the security of our nation. In order to achieve this mission, the department depends on a network of military installations and ranges that provide critical training, testing, and operational areas all across the country. When we conduct these activities, the military often makes noise, sometimes a little noise, sometimes quite a bit of noise, and creates dust and smoke, things that our neighbors don't always appreciate. DoD does rely on dark skies for night training, buffers around our operating areas to ensure safety, and realistic and varied environments that test equipment limits, as well as resilient landscapes that help to sustain DoD activities and personnel. But most of our military installations are not in isolated areas, even if they did start that way a number of years ago. Therefore, partnerships are really critical to sustain compatible and resilient landscapes around our facilities. DoD works with neighbors at the federal, state, local, and private level to promote compatible land uses and to protect critical natural infrastructure, such as water resources, at the landscape level. DoD installations are also part of communities, cities, counties, and states. And not only do we want to be a good neighbor, but we want to ensure a high quality of life for military members and their families. That means sustainable communities, a healthy environment, and access to critical resources, things that are also important to our partners. The scale and scope of DoD's land management is fairly significant. We do own and manage about 27 million acres across the country, and on that land we manage significant natural resources, more endangered species per acre than any other federal agency, a wide variety of vital ecological systems, and in many locations, the only contiguous, undeveloped natural landscape in the region. I borrowed this slide from the Environmental Policy Innovation Center, who recently released a report called Conservation of Defense that examines how to achieve more conservation wins by helping DoD achieve its primary missions to deter war and ensure the country's security. In the words of one senior Pentagon official who was interviewed in the report, the more that non-military lands are managed for wilderness or other conservation uses, the better it is for the Department of Defense. In other words, this means that birds and forests make better neighbors to noisy and potentially dangerous military training than large numbers of people, especially given the future changes in training and military needs around supersonic and hypersonic weapons, a space force, and other technologies that can be dangerous at greater distances. The military needs more space to keep people safe than ever before. When installations are surrounded by development, it makes it hard for us to carry out our training mission. To help protect the use of and access to those 27 million acres, and to protect emerging training and testing requirements, the REPI program was established in 2002. REPI is the Department of Defense's key tool for combating encroachment that can limit or restrict military activities. DoD has authority from Congress under 10 USC 2684A to fund partnership-focused projects around military installations that preserve and enhance military readiness by promoting compatible land use, partnering to manage natural resource issues that can restrict military activities, and increasing the resilience of military installations and ranges. Each of the military services, the Army, Navy, the U.S. Marine Corps, and the Air Force, execute REPI projects that are overseen by my office. The Army's program, which you'll hear about today, is called the Army Compatible Use Buffer Program, or ACUB. The other military services also have similar programs. The types of encroachment pressures that impact military activities have continued to evolve, and the number of installations reporting threats from encroachment has grown. For that reason, in 2019, Congress expanded REPI's authority to address installation resilience as a key element of the REPI program. This authority allows DoD to address anticipated or unanticipated changes in environmental conditions by engaging in activities that protect, restore, and support natural infrastructure solutions. The REPI program is funded at approximately $100 million per fiscal year, making it the fourth largest federal land protection program. It is important to note that the work done within the REPI program is not only resourced by DoD funds appropriated by Congress, but also through non-DoD partner funds, approximately $850 million through the end of FY19 to be exact. These are other federal, state, local, and private dollars that are leveraged with DoD funds to accomplish outcomes on the ground around installations and ranges that preserve and enhance military readiness, protect installation and community resilience, and conserve important natural resources and open space. These partnership-focused investments have allowed the REPI program and our partners to permanently protect over 688,000 acres around 109 military installations and ranges in 33 states. And the REPI program is continuing to explore new opportunities to protect military assets and capabilities through a variety of enhanced resilience partnerships that preserve coastal wetlands and oyster reefs to reduce storm surge and flooding, manage fuel load on forest lands to reduce wildfire risks, and protect upstream water resources to provide water security to communities and installations like those we're going to hear about today. Another way that DoD builds broad-based coalitions is through the Sentinel Landscapes Partnership. Founded in 2013 by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Department of Defense, and Department of the Interior, Sentinel Landscapes is an alliance of federal agencies, state and local governments, and private organizations that collaborates to enhance land use planning and empowers private landowners around military installations to carry out sustainable management practices on their properties. Through fiscal year 19, projects across the 7 Sentinel landscapes that you see noted on this map have attracted over $405 million in federal funds, $169 million in state funds, and $95 million in local and private funds, resulting in permanent conservation on over 467,000 acres of land and the enrollment of 2.3 million acres in technical assistance programs that improve soil health, maintain forested landscapes, and protect critical water resources. The video you're about to see will provide a brief introduction to Sentinel Landscapes and showcase the power and opportunity of this collaboration. I look forward to today's presentations and all of your questions, and thank you again for the opportunity to join you today.
Sentinel is the soldier at the ready to protect and defend. The landscape is the environmental qualities. So I think the Sentinel landscape represents a goal to achieve both.
The promise of a Sentinel landscape is a military mission, vibrant working lands, and that conservation value, that natural landscape. We have an opportunity to protect those working lands and protect those natural areas.
The size of the Sentinel landscape works at a scale that nature works at. It works at a scale where nature actually functions.
We're not just warfighters, we're land stewards. That stewardship goes beyond our boundary.
Farmers and ranchers are the world's first conservationists. They're the ones that are taking care of the land every day.
This is where the water is the healthiest on the whole Mississippi River. Well, that's cool. Trumpeters cruising right over.
We have the lifeblood of the country, so to speak, running right through our backyard.
For the Sentinel landscape to really look to the future and bring the partners together to talk about their common goals, it's a model we need to really expand across the country.
The Sentinel landscape is an idea that has the possibility of uniting people. We can come together on this idea of a secure future.
Terrific. Thank you, Kristen, for this broad overview of DoD's footprint, its programs, and the interest it has in lands outside of its borders, and its true commitment to partnerships like Sentinel Landscapes. And so our next speaker is Shannon Wetstein, who I said was the district manager of the Morrison Soil and Water Conservation District. And Shannon will be talking about the Camp Ripley Sentinel landscape, which you saw a couple images of in the video just now. If we're ready to get started with that, let's hear from Shannon.
Yes, thanks, Jeff. Okay, there we go. Thanks again, Jeff, and thank you everyone for taking the time to listen here today. Again, my name is Shannon Wetstein, and I'm the district manager at the Morrison Soil and Water Conservation District here in central Minnesota. And I'm also one of the primary partners in our Camp Ripley Sentinel landscape. I just want to mention, for those of you who are not familiar with working with conservation districts, we are in almost every county in the country, and some of us go by different names depending on what state you're in. Might know us by resource conservation districts or land conservation committees, but essentially we all share a mission that's here to coordinate with all available sources, whether it be public, private, local, state, or federal sources, to develop locally driven solutions to address natural resource concerns. And one of our main goals really is to protect groundwater resources. That's why it's really exciting for me to be here with you guys today and talk about our program. The main things I want to cover is, why would Camp Ripley be interested in watershed protection, and why are our partners interested in a Sentinel landscape that you've just seen that amazing video of. I want to tell you a little bit about how we went about setting our goals, primarily addressing drinking water and protecting drinking water. And then I want to share with you why I think our program will continue to be successful. I also included a corny little, our ingredients, a little cheat sheet to how I think and feel that we went about creating a successful Sentinel landscape program here on the side, which I'll keep coming back to, but shared goals, our partners, and of course, implementation money. In the end, sharing the success of our program to others is really rewarding, and why I think we keep coming together. So being here with you today to share this as one of the rewards of the work that we do. So first off, Camp Ripley, as you saw on that map earlier, is located in central Minnesota. So up far, up north, generally, really water-rich landscape. We have, camp is located on the northern stretch of the Mississippi River. So some of those images from the video where you saw the trumpeter swans and the guys in the canoe in the boat talking about, water resources and quality water was from Minnesota here. Camp Ripley is a primary winter training ground for the U.S. National Guard, and we support not only troops from Minnesota, but 6 neighboring states, but other personnel from other armed services and state and federal agencies train at Camp Ripley. They do such things like vehicle maneuver training, live fire artillery, bombing training on ranges, and small arms weaponry training on the base. But surrounding Camp Ripley, it primarily is made up of private lands that are range typically in size from 60 to 100 acres. They're mainly used for agriculture, as you can see in the picture. So farming, row crops, and then for recreation. The northern half of our Sentinel landscape, so roughly around here, is primarily forested. And then the southern part of our Sentinel landscape is a lot more agricultural in nature. So why Camp Ripley is interested in watershed protection, first off, is because they understand landowners and these surrounding lands really contribute to the longevity of training abilities at Camp Ripley. Landscape pressure for development has been increasing in this area. We're located in, like I said, central Minnesota, but close to a fairly good-sized cities. There's pressure from people that work out at camp to live close to camp. So population growth is increasing in this area of the state, and land use changes or conversion of land. So maybe it's going from forested to ag lands as well. So the goal of the Camp Ripley Sentinel landscape, which the Minnesota state law first recognized in 2015, is to combine conservation easements with sustainable management practices to protect Camp Ripley's mission and enhance natural resources in the region. This blue outline is a watershed delineation of, portion of the Mississippi. And really, looking at this landscape, when we're choosing, what our boundaries were going to be, we use different boundaries. This is one of them, but as you can see, central Minnesota, this is about where camp is where we see most of the land use change and conversion happening. So why would we, the Soil and Water Conservation District, and our other partners be interested in a Sentinel landscape? Well, I already mentioned for SWCDs, or Soil and Water Conservation Districts, protecting groundwater has always been a primary driver for our mission. But in Minnesota, we've also been doing watershed planning for over 30 years. And citizens as well as state agencies are very concerned with water supply and water quality issues. So our partners in this landscape are connected to the watersheds by shared strategies that will achieve future conditions that we are all hoping for. And here I have some of the shared goals that we've had and shared through this process. And again, when I talk about partners, I'm talking about our state agencies. I'm talking about folks that work for non-governmental units, such as land trusts and the Nature Conservancy. And then also we've been branching out and pulling in other private and public partners. So as you can see here again is delineated watershed. Here is Minneapolis-St. Paul. And really this, if I just snip this, but it says where our water comes from, up in this area. And the question is from these people, where our water is coming from. It's all coming from this landscape that we're working within. And here the state had identified in this picture the importance of watershed protection. This, again, central area of the state and the headwaters of the Mississippi being one of the primary areas of the state for watershed protection, especially groundwater resources. So we've all worked together in the Sentinel landscape to develop, a strategy plan with our shared goals that really is binding us all together about solving resource concerns in the area. And I just wanted to share an example of one of our goals and how we've worked together on this is through nitrate contamination. And those of you in the audience, are aware of health risks that come from consuming elevated levels of nitrates, but you also probably understand that removing nitrates from drinking water supplies can be super expensive. So one of our primary goals is working on this resource concern. We used existing data that was collected by our state agencies as our primary base for reasoning and for resource protection and restoration. There's a lot of private wells on this landscape. People, like I said, are very rural, and with ag in the area, there is elevated nitrates that exceed drinking water standards. Over here, I have public water supplies, and we know that, for example, the city of St. Cloud has 60,000 people that pull their water from the Mississippi River. St. Paul, Minneapolis, down here, has over 4 million people. So this is a huge concern that we're trying to address as a group. And how we did this really was by, and specifically for nitrates, was by prioritizing the goals that we had and targeting what would be the best management practices to implement on the landscape, and then ultimately measuring our impacts. So this is from the Department of Ag. They had set kind of goals for nitrate reductions in the state. Then they also had identified how do you go about doing this with best management practices on the landscape. We work with landowners that want to work with us. It's all voluntary, of course. So working with USDA and the Natural Resource Conservation Service, or NRCS, really we've identified, cover crops and perennial vegetation on the landscape and found programs to encourage landowners to adopt those practices. But our group also developed what we use as our toolkit here. We know not all landowners are going to be able to implement something that's going to cost them a lot of money. We know some landowners are not as educated on issues that we're talking about. So we really work off this trajectory of where they're at. Is it just education? Is it management? Or are we looking at acquiring lands and preserving them in conservation easements?
Shannon, sorry to interrupt, you've got just about 3 minutes or so left. Okay.
Perfect. Thanks, Jeff. So, the other ingredient that I mentioned earlier is that you have to have money in order to get this done. And Kristen had really highlighted, around the country what sort of dollars they're working with. But here on our landscape, this is what our funding looks like by partners. As you can see, blue as USDA. We've been working with them on a specific RCPP, and you'll hear more about that later. Then we have DOD, which has been the backbone of our programs. And then a ton of our funding comes from the state, because before the Sentinel landscape, we had been working on ACUB, which Kristen also mentioned, to acquire conservation easements in this landscape. And that really, the success of that program has led to us coming together on the Sentinel landscape and allowing us to have success, get partners together, and then also to leverage additional funds for our program. So again, you know, really the success of our program here in Minnesota with Camp Ripley has been, you know, these shared goals, and really that's what binds us all together and has brought partners to the room. But having that implementation money as well, which we use one another to leverage additional funds, which just feeds off itself, right? Once you have success, you keep on building. And our meetings are more or less a time that we get together to share our success stories, and also to reach out to one another to see what additional support's needed. And you know, what we're doing is taking the lessons we've learned and taking the success that we've had to really bring our program to the next level. Here you can see this outline. This is our ACUB boundary, and the red and pink parcels in here are conservation easements that have been acquired. So really that land protection. And then out here is our Sentinel landscape boundary, where we're working more on agricultural restoration in the south and forestry in the northern part of the landscape, ultimately to achieve one of our goals, which is drinking water protection and source water protection within the state of Minnesota and beyond. So thank you very much for hearing and learning a little bit about Camp Ripley, and it was my pleasure. Thank you.
Wow, perfect. Absolutely perfect, Shannon. And thank you so much for sharing your recipe for success of shared goals and partners and implementation dollars, and how that comes together for both protection as well as land management issues within your large landscape.
Thank
you.
you.
Now we are moving on to Florida. Susan Carr with the North Florida Land Trust is going to talk to us about the O2O program. Looks like you're there, Susan. Welcome.
Yes. Can you see my slideshow? Oh, here we go. Hi.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Can you see me and the slideshow?
We can.
Okay, great. Okay, just checking. All right. Hi. Yes, my name is Susan Carr down here in sunny Florida. I feel like we're on the southern end of this story that Shannon just told. I work for the North Florida Land Trust. I'm a program manager for the Ocala to Osceola Wildlife Corridor. That's what O2O stands for. North Florida Land Trust is based in Jacksonville, Florida, but we work throughout the northern part of the state. And today I'm going to tell a similar story about public-private partnerships and a land centered on a landscape conservation initiative, and how our military buffer program around Camp Blanding has really spearheaded and accelerated this program for the greater landscape. And then I'm going to follow up with maybe some suggestions of how water utilities can work within this partnership model, or with military installations in a similar ways in other regions. Okay, brief introduction to my landscape. This is the O2O Wildlife Corridor. It's about a 100-mile long stretch of region here. It's about a big area, 1.6 million acres. About half of it is in public land ownership. It's bounded by two large national forests, the Ocala and Osceola National Forests. And right in the middle is Camp Blanding, which is Florida's largest National Guard installation, Army National Guard. The yellow bits are Florida Forever project areas. I'll explain that a little bit later, but that goes to our state conservation program, Florida Forever. Okay, so these, it's the O to O is largely forested, lots and lots of pines. Here's some pine uplands. And since we're pretty flat down here, the a few inches or feet can really change the hydrology. And we have lots and lots and lots of wetlands of all sorts, forested wetlands, cypress tupelo swamps, and a lot of lakes and herbaceous dominated wetlands. Okay, so the O to O wildlife corridor is part of in the bigger picture, is part of the Florida Wildlife Corridor, which is depicted by the green shading. This is not actual conservation lands. This is a vision. I like to call it the blueprint for conservation, and it's based on the Florida Ecological Greenways Network, which is really sort of the science-based model behind this. So we're working on building a section of this greater area, and then there are other partnerships and stuff devoted to other parts of this. But so back to my section here, the O to O, it's because it's wildlife corridor, it's not defined by a watershed. However, it spans 6 big watersheds in Florida, and a lot of what it covers is kind of the headwater regions of these watersheds. Just real quick, we don't have mountains or anything, but we do have old Pleistocene ridge physiographic features, and so these brightly colored ridge systems run largely north and south throughout the peninsula, and so the O to O covers this area, which is really the headwater regions for the lower St. Johns and Swanee River and other watersheds. Okay, so of course, we go to the threats. Florida is growing. We have 100,000 people a day moving down here. So this is roughly the current situation here. That's Camp Blanding in the middle. You can see there's already quite a bit of development around the installation. Now, some modelers have said, well, if we continue on this trend, this is what it'll look like by mid-century. So you see Camp Blanding has become a relative island there. So as are lots of parts down here around the Ocala National Forest. Jacksonville area over here, I think one of the fastest growing parts of the nation, and so is Central Florida down here. So anyhow, the O to O, we have, like Shannon was talking about with the partnership with the similar goals, we have kind of a two-pronged mission with the landscape initiative. It's to protect habitat, working forests, and watersheds. So this is the natural resource protection end of it. Of course, there's a lot of overlap here. We work a lot with habitat conservation. Well, that plays a lot into watershed protection. But then the second part is trying to protect military readiness in our landscape. And so I've talked already about Camp Blanding. Here it is with its buffer area around it. But there's also the Pine Castle Ridge bombing complex down here in and around the Ocala National Forest, and with a large impact area. So, conservation, the O to O, good for the military. Okay, well, the kind of the two-part action on how to implement this goal is land protection and land management. So in short, our land protection goals for the greater O to O are lofty. We figure if we could build this corridor with 140,000 acres by mid-century, that's what we're working on with support from the Healthy Watersheds and others. But then also land management, conservation land management on public and private lands, with the goal of improving habitat and land management that will benefit watershed resources. One way to do this, not every acre is created equal for land protection, so we've baked in watershed data into our conservation priority model. So this is a little heat map showing, low and high priorities based on what the partnership has deemed important. And part of that is watershed resources, especially aquifer recharge zones, surface water resources, and stuff like that. So, and then, so back to the Camp Blanding Army Compatible Use Buffer Program, as Kristen was describing, this is the Army's REPI program for buffer land protection. I want to point out that everything I'm describing, we are not a sentinel landscape, okay, but we have a lot of similarities to other sentinel landscapes in the partnership approach and landscape initiative approach. So the North Florida Land Trust is the leader of this, has a cooperative agreement with Camp Blanding to partner in the ACUB program. The water management districts, see, we have water management districts down here. They're involved. In fact, they were one of the early partners specifically with this program. And we have protected over 7,000 acres in the ACUB since 2017. Well, what are the interests of Camp Blanding here? Well, of course, it's to deter incompatible land use, as people have mentioned already. But it's also, we have a lot of endangered species. We have a lot of water pressure down here, even though it rains a lot. We have a lot of water consumption issues. So it's to avoid more regulatory restriction that might come from listing of certain imperiled species or from overconsumption of groundwater or groundwater pollution or water pollution that may occur. So that's how the ACUB program can help the installation specifically, and of course the greater landscape. Okay, so similar to what Shannon described, our ACUB program was really the springboard and the foundation to build this much larger partnership and bring in funding from state programs and funding from the NRCS through the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. So we have the greater O2O partnership has about 18 members, so I didn't list them all here, but I like to talk about sort of the three-legged stool here of getting this done is military, DOD, just like Shannon said, DOD, state, and Farm Bill. So, and we've got 2 RCPPs, which I'll talk about in a minute, and yeah, or I'll talk about right now. Okay, so the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, it seems to be like peas and carrots with DOD programs. Because that's how we leverage this RCPP was through our ACUB program. The match requirements are very flexible in that you can match, because these big RCPP programs require a lot of partner match. You can use ACUB and DOD contributions as match, even though it's federal to federal match funding. You can do it. The Farm Bill programs fund easements and conservation management in the form of cost share programs, which is great for, instituting that conservation management. And it allows partners to help the NRCS guide the application of these Farm Bill programs. And it is centered on many resource concerns. Ours, again, are longleaf pine, restoration, gopher tortoise, working forest, but also water, protection of water and watersheds. This is just real brief how RCPP is getting applied in Florida. Here's ours, the O2O. Here's the Avon Park Sentinel landscape that we saw in the movie. They have an RCPP here. But I just wanted to point out some of the RCPPs are very specific to watersheds like these here. So I think it's a great tool for protecting land and watersheds. And then the state conservation programs, our premier one is Florida Forever. It buys land and fee and easements. It's a very landscape focused program that has a willing seller implementation model. And when anything goes, if there's a proposed Florida Forever acquisition, it is evaluated for watershed benefits, and the water management districts are involved in that whole process. So big tool for us. It's helped us protect some of this land in here, and I hope a lot more in the near future. So take-home message here is we have a lot of missions on a landscape initiative. We have a lot of different missions with a nexus of watershed health, and even so we bring in a lot of programs Farm Bill, DOD, and state. Again, there's a lot of overlap with a nexus of watershed health. So seems to work pretty well as a model for landscape conservation. So I talked a lot about how land protection is a good watershed asset. So I'll just say it's in our case, if you protect land, you're going to deter overconsumption of groundwater and pollution. And if you do it strategically, you do that even better. So we're thinking, you know, we're working with our water management districts who are into this, and it's a good investment. And so it's for the low cost of land protection yields great downstream benefits. I guess that's how you say that. So, but then I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you got about 3 minutes. You're doing great. I just wanted to give you a little time check.
Perfect. I'm almost done. Okay. So, and then I just wanted to touch on, this is something we're really kind of just getting into, and we hope this part grows, is conservation land management as a watershed asset. So this could even be land managed on private lands, hopefully protected with easements, or not even protected with easements. But the research around here is showing that land management, forestry management for wildlife is good for water. So, you know, here's my little depiction. If you take some high density stand and you clear it of oaks and stuff to a open pine woodland, which is awesome for all of our imperiled species, birds, gopher tortoise, institute prescribed burning, that's good for water. That's good for aquifer recharge. And just to drive that home, our little totem animal here, the gopher tortoise, lives in deep sands and loves these open pine woodlands with grass and lots of stuff to eat. Here's where he's been kicking out all that sand. So, I mean, if you mapped optimal gopher tortoise habitat, it would be very coincident with areas that are good for aquifer recharge. And remember, 90% of our drinking water comes from the Floridan aquifer. So good for the tortoise, good for the water. Okay, so just my advice to utilities, talk with your local land trusts if you're interested in participating in any of these partnerships. There's probably, you know, local land trusts have a lot of partners and a lot of contacts. Maybe they're involved in something already with the military or other partnerships. And then this is a part we've been talking a lot, and I hope this grows, is how to quantify these assets related to land protection in your watershed. So I'll just leave with this Florida example. If you protect 1 acre, especially if it's in a high aquifer recharge area, you can increase your water supply to the aquifer by nearly 400 gallons per day. Well, if you're buying, you know, land at $3,000 or $4,000, that's a great investment that would, you know, yield benefits for years to come. And the management example, similar. If you restore a farm to a native forest, say, and so you reduce the nutrient runoff from that farm, so the cost to do that may be much less than the cost to treat that water and remove those nutrients later on. Okay, so anyhow, thank you. I just want to, in summary, want to parrot that military partnerships make a great basis for successful landscape conservation initiative and watershed protection. And I can't overemphasize the power of the public-private partnership in all this. And I'm happy that to be working with folks, and I encourage you guys to quantify your watershed health benefits. And consider them assets, land management and land protection for assets. And thank you very much. That's it. So I'm Susan Carr. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Susan, for highlighting this intersection between habitat and water resources and military needs across this large and rapidly developing landscape in Florida. So appreciate your time and expertise on this. Our next speaker is John Barrett, again with the Arizona Land and Water Trust, and John's going to be talking to us about a very different landscape, but the Fort Huachuca area and its regional water conservation needs. John?
Great, thanks, Jeff. Just to test, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay, just want to start off by thanking Jeff and the Healthy Watersheds Consortium for inviting the Arizona Land and Water Trust to participate in this, and to the AWWA for hosting this webinar. So I'll just start by giving a brief overview of who we are. The Arizona Land and Water Trust is a nonprofit land trust, and our primary function is to help landowners who are interested in permanently protecting their private land. And the main tool we use is a conservation easement, and there has been some conversation at earlier points in this webinar about a conservation easement. For those of you who don't know what they are, they're essentially deed restrictions that are imposed that limit future development and prescribe certain uses while allowing others. In our region, typically conservation easements support ranching operations while prescribing owners from doing significant develop on their property or subdividing or lot splitting or things of that nature. Conservation easements can often be donated, and there are attendant tax benefits to the landowners who do that. But generally, the Arizona Land and Water Trust works with people who are interested in selling conservation easements, and that's how we came to work with the Department of Defense and Fort Huachuca. And the REPI program is, as Kristen mentioned and others have mentioned, the REPI program provides money for the purchase of conservation easements. So that's how we came to have a relationship with Fort Huachuca and the REPI program. Just real quick, basically what I'm going to talk to you today about is, the Fort Huachuca natural landscape, where the fort's located and some of the features of it, some of the threats and challenges, primarily related to water to the fort and the region, and then a really broad overview of some of the work that the fort is either spearheading or a part of to increase its resilience in the region. And here you've got a picture of the San Pedro River, which I will talk about more, but that's an important river that flows along the east side of Fort Huachuca. So this is a map of the fort and the larger Fort Huachuca Sentinel landscape. The landscape is outlined in purple, and it's about 1.6 million acres, just to give you a sense of the size. And this is known as the Buffalo Soldier Electronic Testing Range. And people in the military who are far more experienced with these things can talk to you about what the Buffalo Soldier Electronic Testing Range is. But essentially what it is an area where there is almost no naturally occurring electromagnetic interference. And it's also a very rural area with very limited development. And so there's not a lot of human-caused electromagnetic interference either. And so because of that, it's a really good place for the Army to test all of its electronic equipment. And because it's rural, it's also a place where the Army trains its UAV pilots. We sometimes refer to them as drones, although I have been corrected multiple times that a drone is not a UAV. A drone is sort of automated and a UAV is piloted. So the Army trains its UAV pilots at Fort Huachuca. And you can see the fort is right there in the middle. It is that green area as well. So this is what the Fort Huachuca Sentinel landscape looks like, not on a map. So over here you've got north of the fort, which is dominated by grasslands that are historically used for ranching. To the west and south of the fort, you have the Coronado National Forest. And this one that's pictured here is just an entrance to the National Forest. And then down below, you've got an aerial image of Sierra Vista. And Sierra Vista is a town or a small city that borders the fort. And it's really the largest city within the Fort Huachuca Sentinel landscape. So this is just to show you what it looks like. For those of you who are not in Arizona, familiar with Arizona, I promise it's not all sand and tumbleweeds. So this is more what it looks like. And today I want to talk mostly about water conservation and what the fort is doing to support water conservation. So I thought I'd just show you sort of what's going on in terms of the rivers. So there are two major rivers that flow north out of Mexico through the Sentinel landscape. And the first is the Santa Cruz River here on the west, and it's right here, it flows out of the United States, south into Mexico, and then turns north and flows back in the United States. And the second is the San Pedro River, which flows north out of Mexico as well. And both of these rivers flow through the Sentinel landscape, and the fort is located right about here. These are the Huachuca Mountains, and this is the fort. So you can see it's sort of bookended by these two rivers. So the first is the San Pedro River. Just want to sort of share a few characteristics of it so people know what we're talking about. It is free flowing, and it has the distinction of being the last undammed river in the American West. Though recently it's been a bit of a flashpoint river for controversy because there is a stretch of border wall being built right across it. So it's raised the hackles, or this construction has raised the hackles of quite a few environmental groups for good reason, and also the local community. The San Pedro River is also critical and essential for migrating wildlife. So to illustrate this, for those of you who aren't familiar with Arizona, less than 0.5% of Arizona's land is deemed riparian, and yet 90% of the state's species rely on those riparian areas at some point in time in their life cycle. So I can't overstate the importance of these river corridors and these riparian areas. And then to the west is the Santa Cruz River, which is a very different river. It's largely effluent dependent. There is a very large wastewater treatment plant in Nogales, Mexico, that discharges treated wastewater into the Santa Cruz, and it supports the flow for many miles. And it's subject to a lot of international laws, international treaties. There's an international group that manages it. So I'm not even going to get into the management of the Santa Cruz River, but suffice to say, it is effluent dependent. It's also a culturally significant area. Some of the areas that have been historically irrigated along the Santa Cruz River are some of the oldest agricultural lands in the United States. And the headwaters of the Santa Cruz River are in the Fort Huachuca Sentinel landscape, so it is particularly important for our discussion. I want to talk a little bit about the threats to these two river systems in the larger Fort Huachuca Sentinel landscape, and neither of them should be very surprising to anybody. The first is climate change. We are in what some are calling a mega drought now, where we've had some of the hottest, driest years on record. And as a result, the rivers are really drying up. So this is a picture of the San Pedro River near Fort Huachuca, and there is no water in it. And the second threat is more acute to the area, and that is groundwater pumping. And significant groundwater pumping is dropping the aquifer level and thereby dropping the river flow in both the San Pedro and also the Santa Cruz rivers. That's just a little interesting fact. Because of pumping, the aquifer under Fort Huachuca and Sierra Vista is dropping 2.2 feet per year on average. And at this point, it doesn't show much sign of slowing down unless we get some significant rain soon, and the forecast does not seem to call for that. So in response to these threats, Fort Huachuca is sort of taking a multi-pronged approach. And the first one I want to talk about today is land protection. So there is a generally accepted idea that where land is left in its natural state, it benefits the larger watershed. So the Department of Defense uses its resources to help purchase conservation easements in the Sentinel landscape to protect these large family-owned ranches. And the idea here is that when it does rain, the water has an opportunity to percolate into the ground rather than running off on hardscape and not having an opportunity to soak in. And second, it prevents large-scale development where people will sink in wells and pump the water from the aquifer underneath even further. So this land protection is sort of the first thing the fort is doing to try to protect the rivers and the water resources in the area. This is just a few pictures of the ranches that have been protected using ACUB or REPI money. Again, these have been working lands for generations, really. This is another one. This is called the Babacomery Ranch, and it was recently purchased. The conservation easement, excuse me, was recently purchased with both ACUB money and NRCS money. And I wanted to show this picture to sort of highlight the point here. The cottonwoods in the back are along a major tributary to the San Pedro River. So by protecting this land, we were also had an opportunity to protect some of the tributary waters to the San Pedro River. So that just sort of shows the nexus between land protection and water protection that the Fort Huachuca and the Department of Defense is on the front lines of. The Arizona Land and Water Trust received a Healthy Watershed grant from the Healthy Watershed Consortium. And I wanted to show this particular image to show that nexus between land and water and give a nod to Healthy Watersheds program. What this is it shows the Fort Huachuca Sentinel landscape in the red outline, but in the purple outline is an area that the Healthy Watersheds Consortium gave us a grant to identify and prioritize those private lands whose protection would most benefit the Santa Cruz River. And ultimately, this work is supposed to help us identify those land protection projects that we should prioritize. And I think it's safe to say that one of the reasons we were able to successfully secure this Healthy Watersheds grant is because part of the area lies within the larger Fort Huachuca Sentinel landscape. So I just wanted to illustrate that point. Another project that Fort Huachuca is part of for water protection is what's referred to as the Cochise Conservation Recharge Network. Cochise County is one of the two counties where the Fort Huachuca Sentinel landscape is located, but the network is 6,344 acres of land where recharge and replenishment can most benefit river flows into the San Pedro River. And it's a network of partners that's really broad. It includes the county, several municipalities, nonprofits, the local NRCDs, local environmental groups, including and primarily the Nature Conservancy. And if there's anybody out there who's a member of the Nature Conservancy or familiar with the Nature Conservancy, that organization really deserves a ton of credit for doing this work. But the network is essentially areas where water projects or water installations have been built to facilitate groundwater recharge. And these lands were acquired using ACUB money in a lot of these times. And this is to show you a map of the Cochise County, or the Cochise Conservation Recharge Network. Over here is the fort. Sierra Vista is right here on the to the east of the fort. And all of these green areas are lands that have been acquired to facilitate recharge into the San Pedro River, which flows right here. This is just to show you some examples of what these projects look like. This is a large retention basin that was created to facilitate recharge into the aquifer near the river. Back in the background here are the Huachuca Mountains, and Fort Huachuca lies within those Huachuca Mountains. These are some other images of network projects, effluent settling ponds, and so forth. This is just to give you an example of these open space projects and the water recharge efforts that have been made. This shows you sort of the cumulative benefits of these recharge projects as more land is acquired and these recharge projects constructed. You can see that several thousand acre feet of water are being saved. We recognize that this is not enough, but it is a fantastic start. And we are still working with Fort Huachuca and the REPI program to identify more land that's suitable for the Cochise Conservation Recharge Network, and hope to expand the facilities in the coming years. A few other efforts that are worth highlighting. The first is the Upper San Pedro Partnership. And this is a large consortium of over 40 member groups that ranges from federal agencies, several state agencies, national and local nonprofit groups. The University of Arizona participates, several private consulting groups and municipalities. And essentially what the Upper San Pedro Partnership does is it generates the science and collects the data to identify those areas where further recharge would most benefit the San Pedro River. And one of the primary goals of the Upper San Pedro Partnership is to ensure the long-term viability of Fort Huachuca. And this is primarily to acknowledge that Fort Huachuca is a major economic driver in the region. I don't know the figures off the top of my head, but I know that Sierra Vista is really on the map because of Fort Huachuca. So there is an interest in keeping Fort Huachuca viable because it's a really important economic driver in the region. And the last group that I do want to mention, which I cannot really dive into today, is the Western Regional Partnership, and that was established in 2007. And that is the Department of Defense partnership with other federal, state, and tribal entities in 6 Western states to really figure out the policy goals and the laws and the work that needs to be done to conserve water in the West. So while the Upper San Pedro Partnership is really locally focused and the ACUB projects that we get money for are really locally focused, the WRP is really a driver at the top levels. And one of the focuses of the WRP is water security, both for the region and all of the military installations that are located in the American West. It's a group worth looking into, and I've put in the website here just so people can go check that out. But it's worth learning more about for sure. And I just want to conclude with a few final thoughts. It's really important, I think, to note that the Department of Defense and the local military installations are really taking a lead role in planning for resilience at a regional scale. Partnering with them it should benefit everybody who's listening to this. And the other thing I want to mention is that a lot of the traditional boundaries, I think, jurisdictional boundaries between federal and state agencies, between the various agencies, between nonprofits and private industry, really sort of break down with some of the Sentinel landscape work. But there's a larger sense of wanting to get things done that's better for everybody. And I've been really pleased with how the partners within the Sentinel landscapes work. And just a really good example of that is we were able to recently secure a grant from the Department of Defense through the REPI Challenge program to get money to do restoration and fuels management in a national forest. So that just sort of shows you the fluidity between the pots of money and the lands that can be supported by the REPI program. So Jeff, that's all I've got. If you want to take it away and move on to the question and answer, I'd be happy to answer any questions people have.
Super, terrific, John. Thank you so much for the presentation, for your comments, for sharing information on this very quiet and dark and fairly dry corner of the country and how it connects with the different major rivers of the Southwest. And so now we have about 20 minutes or so left, and I think that's plenty of time for us to answer some questions that we may have from the audience. And I think the first thing we're going to do is turn on our webcams here so you can see our shining faces. And I'm going to encourage everybody out in the audience there, if you have questions, please submit them into the question pane and we'll deal with them as they come in. We actually do have a question to begin with. This one is for Shannon. Shannon, what are the long-term measures of success for the Camp Ripley conservation efforts? How do the shared goals reflect common and different metrics for each of the partners? I think you're on mute.
Yes, thank you for the question. So some of our goals, I really highlighted on our nitrate reduction strategy, but there's many other goals that we've identified as part of our strategy. We work in kind of 2 spheres, protection and restoration. So as far as protection goals, within our ACUB area, we have a protection goal of 76,000 acres. And if you remember when I was talking about what our land holdings are, average is 60 to 100 acres per landowner. It's something that we have made a ton of progress on, and we're at 30,000 acres right now. I'm really proud to be at that point, but we've got a long ways to go when you're working 40 acres at a point. Some of the restoration goals that we have kind of span from forestry protection, so acres as far as forested lands protected, that we work in conjunction with the state of Minnesota and the mentioned the USDA RCPP grant that we have. We also have the goals that I mentioned that kind of go along with working with individual landowners and restoration efforts, which would be sediment reduction, nutrient reduction, not just nitrates. And so we're working, I don't have the specific metrics in front of me, but basically, when we're looking for money, we're writing in those specifics and tracking where we're at. But ultimately, it all leads towards habitat protection, water quality, water quantity, and then basically preservation of our lands. And like John and Susan had highlighted, we're really supporting working lands. So we don't want to kick farmers out of our landscape. We want to promote them as land stewards, and we want to facilitate and have goals that will allow them to continue to operate, but provide incentives or additional funds to help them get to where we need them to be and where maybe is best for their management as well. Did that answer the question, Jeff? Or?
I think so. I hope it did. It also made me think about some of the comments that Susan made in her presentation about quantifying benefits and making that point. So I was wondering, Susan, if you wanted to add anything to what Shannon was saying about how you're thinking about metrics within your landscape.
Sure. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Never know. Yeah, I could just really echo a lot of what Shannon just said, but for us down here, so we're working on that. I mean, we're trying to get beyond the bucks and acres quantification, because we still are, we protected X number of acres. We restored X number of acres. But and it's interesting because this is also propelled by the NRCS, which I guess in this new farm bill, it's very, very important that we move beyond that style of quantification to these actual natural resource metrics. So we are focused on just gallons to the aquifer, and that's why I used it as my example. And to that end, it's kind of a modeling exercise, so we can model the gallons that from precluded land conversion or something like that, right? If you protect some land, you can estimate the gallons to the aquifer or even the surface water that you protect. And now we're actually working with the University of Florida to make a model for forest management. So protection and management. So to the other one, management, if we help a landowner do forest management for water yields and lower basal area management and so on, we want to be able to model the actual water yields from that. So we're working with UF, and they've actually done a lot of work already, but we're going to try to bring it home to the O2O and make a model specifically for that. So, and that's really based on soils and landscape position, stuff like that. But that's what we're working on. We don't have a whole lot of stream miles or anything to report. And then the nutrient reduction is another way to do it, but we're pretty focused right now just on water yields.
Great. So it continues to evolve, the relationship with the water management districts and their interests, and this becomes relevant information to them. Let's shift gears a little bit away from science and metrics per se. And here's a question on, I think, more policy. What are the major statutory or regulatory impediments to working together on all of this in your different landscapes? I see John smiling, so I'm gonna ask you to start. John, do you have a comment on that?
Kristen's laughing at me. So I think that the Sentinel Landscape collaboration, which, just to repeat, is the Departments of Agriculture, Defense, and Interior, is a fabulous idea at 60,000 feet. But as they say, the devil's in the details. So I think we're finding that there are regulatory, there'll be some sort of problem that's embedded in a CFR that only lawyers look at once in a while that pops up. But like one of the more recent examples is both the NRCS and the Department of Defense have enabling statutes that call for their ability to enforce conservation easements in the absence of a land trust being able to do so. And those statutes between the NRCS and the Department of Defense conflict. And so how does the land trust and how do those two agencies reconcile those particular problems? Kristen was amazing helping us out recently. We had sort of an administrative fix on that earlier this year, but it looks like there may need to be some sort of legislative fix to deal with that in the long term. But that's just sort of a good example. But I would say for the most part there, in the work we do with the land protection front, there are not a lot of regulatory hurdles that we have to deal with because it's controlled by state law. And I don't think there's a lot of issues with funding either. But I think Chris can probably talk a little bit more about this behind the scenes in DC.
Yeah, I was going to say, Kristen, would you mind weighing in on this one a little bit more? You've got that 60,000 foot perspective on this.
Sure, absolutely. And it is a good question. And I always appreciate the opportunity to have conversations with the folks who are working on the ground. And John has been a great resource for us in trying to work through some of these issues because, while federal agency folks here in DC may have the best of intentions, when we get together and develop a partnership structure and have a lot of lofty expectations for how that will work and be implemented, John brings up a good point that one, the devil is in the details, and sometimes that devil is the CFR, and trying to understand some of these really complicated financial regulations that each agency has to comply with can really present a challenge. And I think one of the key objectives that was identified when we established the Sentinel Landscape Partnership, and I think this is an area where we have not done enough and we're still looking to improve further, and that is to identify those specific statutory or legislative regulatory conflicts that exist. And unfortunately, sometimes we don't realize what those are until they come to the forefront and we actually see a project that gets stopped in its tracks because of these issues. And if we are able to take advantage of those opportunities and resolve those issues and find solutions, hopefully sometimes administrative solutions, which are much quicker and easier to implement than a legislative solution, but to not be afraid of the legislative solutions. From a DoD standpoint, that's easy for me to say. We are a unique agency within the federal government in that we have a standalone authorization act that is renewed annually. And that Authorization Act allows us to make statutory changes to those authorities that we operate under. And we can do that every year. And we're actually very successful in doing that. And what John alluded to in terms of a challenge we saw between an NRCS program and a DoD program had to do with that idea of having two federal agencies with a right of enforcement. And from the federal government standpoint, the Department of Defense and the Department of Agriculture are both the US government, and our attorney is the Department of Justice. We cannot have two federal agencies with a conflicting interest in property. One has to allow the other to have priority. And that's always tricky because our lawyers are inherently distrustful of one another, and each agency wants to have that primary authority. And so I think a lot of it is through enhanced understanding, explaining what our objectives are. And then in our case in DoD, we do have the flexibility. Our statutory language is much more flexible than the statutory language in the Farm Bill. And so that puts, to some extent, that pressure on DoD for us to look for and identify those solutions. I would say so we do have some of those conflicts, and we're continuing to work through those. And my advice to folks is, don't let those conflicts deter you from continuing to advance on a project. Bring those forward. If there's a conflict with DoD, come to my office and we will work with you to try to find a solution. I can't always guarantee that we will get to a solution or that it will be easy, but we're very committed to trying to work through that. I would say the other challenge that I think we often run into, and we're continuing to work to find ways to address this, are how we can merge our funding together, how we can use our funding together. And one way that we've addressed that is through what we call funds as match authority. And the Department of Defense funds can be viewed and used as a non-federal match for conservation programs in the Department of Ag and Department of the Interior. And we are hoping to expand that. There is legislative language that is pending right now that would expand that matching authority to all federal programs. I don't know whether we're going to get that approved, but that would really open up some additional opportunities as well. But I think that's also an avenue that water utilities can bring to the table. Is we are all looking, DoD, and I'll speak on behalf of some of my federal partners, we're always seeking those non-federal matches. And Shannon talked about the great state programs in Minnesota. Florida also has some great state programs. Arizona doesn't have as much funding at the state level. And so when you don't have those great state programs, you're really looking at other sources to bring that non-federal match to the table. And we can continue to enhance our ability to match federal funding, but we're always going to be looking for those non-federal sources of funding as well, whether those come from private landowners, donations, whether those come from local county tax revenues, whether those could come from water utility fees or taxes of some kind. So it creates a broader base of funding potential for us to all look at, and that's really important, I think, to all of the work that we do, that leverage of different funding sources. And so I think that's also a constant challenge that we're looking for, is how to piece those funding sources together.
Super, that's great. And I have all kinds of different possible follow-up questions, but I don't want to lose this concept of non-federal match, because I think Shannon, Susan, John, you've all had to deal with this issue in terms of utilizing federal funds, but I'm curious about your perspective on that, and particularly any thoughts you have on what else could water utilities do that might be helpful in your landscape. So maybe just talk about, let's say, non-federal match, and why is that so important, and how could a water utility help you in terms of the work you're trying to do in your landscapes? Who wants to go first? How about Susan? How about we
okay,
start with
well,
you?
let's see. How could a water utility? So we, I mean, I'm kind of like I'm going to go back to the quantification thing. You know, help us with the tools of how to do this. Of course, that doesn't really address your question about the match. Now, they can bring match to the table, because that's a non-federal source right there. So, and they could avail themselves from, I mean, I do think, for all of its pitfalls and everything, RCPP is a pretty good program for utilities to be part of, because you can do a lot of match at a gestalt level, you know, in a landscape. Water utilities can support a partnership with capacity funding, of course, that's always helpful. Or they can help, you know, lead a partnership, which seems to be kind of the role of the nonprofits in these kind of things. So yeah,
that's good.
Yeah.
How about you, Shannon?
Yeah, I would just say, if folks remember back to my slide where I had the different range of tools from low cost to high cost, and the options along that spectrum for landowners, I would say it'd be the same for you know, folks like yourselves out there in the audience. we do through the district do a lot of education about groundwater, that we pull in our municipals for, and they do that education. So they've been great partners there. But then also, Susan was talking about the NRCS funding that requires a one-to-one match. So anytime that we have partners out there that are willing to write a letter of support that commits a dollar amount, that is huge and gets looked on really favorably. So if it's those actual cash dollars or in-kind time, like I said, to do some of those outreach events, that's super powerful. The reason that I applied for a Healthy Waters Consortium grant in the first place was because I needed someone in our office to work towards some of these goals that I've talked about. And, it wasn't a ton of money, but man, it's made a huge difference to have the ability to have another person in our office that does this work on a day-to-day basis, and is talking with landowners, talking with other agency folks, and then getting these projects on the ground. So offering some dollars, again, doesn't need to be a huge amount, because we're all used to piecing together different funding to make something happen on the landscape. So thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, sure. And John, did you want to add anything on?
Yeah, I've got made a few notes. I think the first thing is water utilities or any utilities can engage with the local nonprofits and land trusts that do this work, and bring, if there's specific projects that the utility is interested in and wants to actually get DoD support for, come work with the land trusts and let us bring it to the various military installations and say, hey, we've got a local utility that's got a land protection project or a water project that they think is valuable. Let us be a spokesperson for it, and let us be a champion for it, and spread it around. I think the utilities need to be at the table, at least in Arizona. Viable watershed protection and river protection requires everybody to be at the table, and it requires the expertise everybody's got. I mean, water utilities obviously have resources they can bring to the table, but they've also got staff with expertise. And I would say bring that expertise to the meetings. These meetings are almost always public, are almost always announced. And if you can't figure out where they are or when they are, build a relationship with your local military installation. When I first took this job and started working here, the idea of working with the garrison commander at Fort Huachuca and her staff was incredibly daunting, but I found that it was not justified, and they're incredibly approachable, friendly people who care a lot about not just the fort and its mission, but the landscape and the community surrounding them. So I would say for those utilities that are aware of the existence of a military installation in their region, and they don't have a relationship with it, you just got to start one, and it shouldn't be that hard. And then I would say, as far as the money goes, yeah, if any utility is interested in supporting a project to sort of create a green portfolio, but doesn't want to go all in and pay for it by itself, work with the local military installation, the Department of Defense, the local land trusts, local environmental groups to leverage that money and have it go in with everybody else's money. You get more bang for your buck that way, and I've really found that with this land protection work as well. So, it's sort of very general guidance that I think we're all throwing out there, but they're good starting places for sure. Or just email Kristen. I mean, she's the most approachable federal agency head I've ever worked with. So just reach out to Kristen, and she could probably put you in touch with the person at the local installation that you need to start a relationship with. So I hope that wasn't throwing you under the bus there, Kristen.
But we're gonna
go add to, I'm sorry. I was saying that this idea of landscapes, it makes things kind of flexible, because then you're dealing at a landscape level. So if you're doing something over here to match something over here, that's what's nice about Sentinel landscapes.
Terrific. Yeah, and we're gonna get back to Kristen here in just a second, but in the last few seconds here, we're gonna need to wrap up. I wanted to share with you a comment that came in. Great perspective on working lands and focus on landowners as stewards. We don't often hear that perspective in the water utility industry. So thank you for that. And then another question, I think this is really for Kristen, about DoD's authority. DoD has authority to fund endowments for long-term management actions, and the suggestion here is that that authority hasn't been used very much to date. Are there any plans to expand the use of that authority? Kristen?
That we do have the ability to fund stewardship endowments. You'll never see the word endowment appear in statute, but the gist of the authority provides us with that ability. We have not used that authority very much. There are a handful of projects. Typically, those are projects that have to do with endangered species management and habitat preservation, and specifically end up relating to endangered species credits from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the need to have permanently protected land with a management plan and perpetual management dollars. That was the kind of the back end story for why we sought that authority. I do think that there are additional potential uses. There's been conversation for a long time, actually, some of that initiated by the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities, to look at clean water revolving funds and trust funds and how we might be able to partner more effectively with DoD to look at watershed protection. So kind of upstream land conservation to protect downstream water resources, and how we could potentially leverage revolving funds to finance some of that work, with DoD providing dollars kind of repaying or coming in on the back end. We've never identified a tangible project that we could really wrap our arms around and look at what that solution might be. So that's an area that I think there's room to explore, and we would be very interested in that. But yes, we're continually looking for opportunities to use these authorities that we have. The challenge is that these projects have to be implemented locally. And so we do a lot of focused engagement from the DoD level down, but we don't force solutions on installations. We really look for places where there is a desire to pursue an innovative strategy, and then work to foster and empower the development of that solution. And so I think these types of opportunities where we bring more voices to the table and more ideas to the table, create an environment in which we can start to generate those ideas and get those to push up, so that as we're pushing pushing folks to be more innovative and creative from the top down, we're also getting some seeds and some ideas from that local level up. And that's really where I think we've seen the greatest success.
Terrific, great perspective. And I think we are probably going to have to wrap it up there. I think we're out of time, but this, I think, is great food for thought. You know, both military installations and water utilities have a long-term vested interest on what's going on the landscape. And so maybe this conversation can help facilitate or inspire some additional conversation and dialogue on that long-term stewardship. So thank you all speakers. Thank you, Department of Defense, Kristen, for being here with us. I want to make folks aware, as we're wrapping up here, there are some additional resources that you may want to be aware of. These are AWWA resources related to source water protection, water conservation, water resources planning, and of course the G300 source water protection standard. We've also got some links on this slide here for NRCS's source water document, a little overview of our Healthy Watersheds grant program. There's some information on REPI and a recent Sentinel Landscapes accomplishments report that was produced just earlier this year. So all of those are available in the handout section, and hope that you'll avail yourselves of that information. And so finally, I think, I also want to mention that there are some upcoming webinars. So those of you that are participating in these webinars on a regular basis, we've got 2-3 more upcoming webinars, October 22nd, tomorrow, and then later this month, October 28th and October 29th, looking at issues like PFAS and also managing cyber risk in the water sector. And you can find more information on AWWA's website under their webinar section. And with that, yep, that's my cue to say thank you very much for being part of today's webinar. And as part of your registration, you're entitled to an additional 30-day archive access to the materials from today's program. And so until next time, please keep the water safe and secure. Thanks very much.